zebras in the Golden State to hippos in South America, here are 14 exotic animals found in unexpected places. 14. Unexpected guest. A man in Idaho got an unexpected and uninvited guest when a 600-pound elk crashed through a plexiglass window and into his basement. When Matthew Siegel entered the basement, he found the animal just staring back at him as if to say, "What are you doing here?" The beast later wandered into the living room, where it appeared to be trapped when it was backed into the corner. Emergency services spent more than 2 hours trying to coax the animal out of the house, but finally it just raced up the stairs of its own accord and went outside, where it returned to its herd, no doubt with quite a tale to tell. 13. Knock knock. So we just told you about the elk that rudely crashed into a guy's home. Now in Thailand, another animal tried a home invasion, but this one at least made an attempt to be courteous. Now imagine seeing an unbelievably huge monitor lizard standing on its back legs and positioned right by your front door. The creature was said to be about the size of a small human. The homeowners and the small dog stood in shock behind the screen door, both of them likely not believing the surreal sight, or at least not wanting to believe it. Later, the massive reptile sprawled itself across the floor, almost as if trying to barricade the homeowners inside. The encounter ended when wildlife experts roped the lizard and led it back into the forest. Better hope they never learn how to turn doorknobs. 12. Cheetal. You can find this species of deer in the United States, Australia, and in Croatia, but the animals are actually native to the Indian subcontinent. They're also known as the axis deer or the spotted deer, and larger specimens can weigh upwards of 200 pounds, possibly more, and the males sport impressive antlers that make them desired by trophy hunters. In the early 1800s, around 1,400 of these deer were introduced to Australia, but while that initial lot did not survive, some of the deer can still be found in the cattle stations of North Queensland. The cheetal was introduced to Texas in 1932 for purposes of hunting. After some of the critters managed to escape, the cheetal started breeding in the wild, and now there are some 6,000 of the wild animals found in Texas, most of them on the Edwards Plateau, where the terrain is comparable to that of India. And as mentioned, these animals can also be found in Croatia, where they were introduced in 1911. Now, the thing about these animals is that their genetic makeup is still unknown, but today they number around 200 individuals on 2 islands of Croatia. 11. Wild European genets. There are upwards of 17 species of these small African carnivorans, and it seems they've been around for quite a while. That's according to the fossil records found in Morocco that date back to the Pliocene, more than 5 million years ago. They're classified as viverrids and are related to civets. While the animals are fairly common throughout Africa, there are only 2 species known to exist in Europe, and that's because in the 12th century, Saracens introduced genets into southern Europe as a type of pest control, and until domesticated cats inherited those duties, genets served to help keep the rodent population in check. Today, they can be found in Spain, Italy, and France, and from what we understand, genets are still feared by rodents. 10. Chamois. Now, when you hear that word, chamois, you might think of chamois, and you might think of the cloth used for buffing your car. But the chamois we're talking about here refers to the animal that indirectly provides your car with a smooth sheen. They are goat antelopes, indigenous to the mountains of Europe, but they were also introduced to New Zealand in 1907 when they were received as a gift from Franz Joseph I, the Austrian emperor. The animals spread over much of South Island and eventually had an adverse impact on New Zealand's native alpine flora, so much so that hunting the animals is restricted and even encouraged by the Department of Conservation. 9. The tahr. Now, on the subject of animals being exported to New Zealand, let's consider the tahr. These are large mountain goats that can weigh more than 150 pounds. They're native to the Himalayas in Nepal and India and were introduced to New Zealand in 1904, just ahead of the chamois. Since tahr had no natural predators in New Zealand, the populations expanded quickly, but, like the chamois, they presented a danger to the native flora. Both groups of animals inhabit higher alpine areas, although they feed on different types of plant life. Another similarity between the two is that hunting the tahr is also unrestricted and often encouraged to keep the populations low. 5. COATIS. Even though they may not be household names, the critters are close relatives of raccoons and belong to the same family. Native to the Americas, a distinctive physical trait is the upturned snout-like nose. These tree-dwelling omnivores seem to adapt to extreme climates. For instance, in South America, they're found in hot and humid Amazonian rainforests to the freezing mountain slopes of the Andes. Overall, the range extends from the southwestern US to Uruguay. And more recently, there have been reports of the critters showing up in Cumbria in the UK. Said to number about 10 individuals, these animals are thought to be the descendants of exotic pets that escaped into the wild. Now, while 10 individuals, that's a small number, but experts are concerned that if the population expands, the coatis might outcompete native species for food sources and habitat. 7. Bay of Pigs. Now, that is not a reference to the location in Cuba, but rather an area in the Caribbean known as Big Major Cay on an uninhabited island. That's uninhabited by humans, anyway. About the last thing you would expect to see running across those pristine beaches would be a group of pigs snorting their way through the sand. Yet, if you were to go there, you might want to take some extra sunblock, because those porkers are friendly enough that they might decide to join in with your sunbathing. Now, how exactly did pigs end up running a beautiful Caribbean island? Well, there is no definitive answer, but most people think the animals were either survivors of a shipwreck or may have been abandoned by sailors who brought them along for food. At any rate, the pigs have become famous in their own right for their swimming antics and for hopping onto boats to scarf up some food from tourists. 6. Wild Scottish wallabies. Wallabies are mid-sized macropods that are closely related to kangaroos, and like most marsupials, they are largely identified with Australia. So it might surprise you to learn that, aside from zoos, they can exist in several other countries as well, one such country being Scotland. They were introduced to Loch Lomond in the 1920s by a countess who seemed to like the idea of the critters hopping about her summer home. It turns out that the wallabies adapted well to the Scottish climate, and about 30 individuals live there today. Now, Scotland is not the only place where wild wandering wallabies have turned up outside of Oz. Feral populations of the macropods can be found in Ireland, on the island of Oahu in Hawaii, and even in France. And that's in a forest about 50 kilometers away from Paris. But chances are those wallabies are going to say bonjour instead of good day. 5. Reindeer. Did you know that the world's largest herd of reindeer is located in the Siberian tundra of Russia, and it's estimated to number upwards of 1 million individuals? That seems like a good place for Santa to recruit another potential Rudolph to guide his sleigh. Or he could take a look at Scotland, which seems to be popping up a lot on this list lately. Well, a domesticated herd of reindeer can be found in the country's Cairngorm Mountains, and they number less than 200 individuals, so admittedly, the selection might not be so deep. However, there is one last remaining herd of wild reindeer living in Europe for Mr. Kringle to choose from, and they would be found in regions of southern Norway. 4. Raccoon dogs of Europe. In spite of their appearance, these animals are not related to raccoons, but as canids, they are closely related to wolves and foxes. They're native to East Asia, and some 10,000 of the animals were introduced to Russia from 1928 to 1958 in an effort to improve the quality of fur. The populations expanded throughout much of Europe to the point that they became viewed as an invasive species in some areas. They managed to survive in Europe thanks to their great adaptability. They can live off of garbage, slow down their metabolism, and even hibernate. In fact, they are the only canids known to do so. And they have another mark on their image. Even though raccoon dogs look cute and fluffy, they are known to carry more than 30 parasites, and that's in addition to rabies, anthrax, and tuberculosis. So maybe now they don't look quite so cute, right? 3. Green iguanas. These lizards are indigenous to Central and South America and the Caribbean, but these days it seems the critters are equally at home in Florida. And why not? They can enjoy the nice weather, picturesque scenery, and all those swimming pools. The problem is, too many residents are finding the iguanas turning up in the pools and golf courses, among other places, and they're becoming so ubiquitous that many are calling them a scourge. They were initially adopted as pets, but as they grew to reach lengths of some 5 feet, the dismayed owners decided to dump them, and since then they've been breeding in the areas in which they were dumped, which include the Miami suburbs. They're not considered dangerous to humans, but they do pose a threat to indigenous plant life and can burrow through valuable landscaping. Also, they are very resilient critters. After cold snaps killed off many of the iguanas in 2009 and 2010, their populations quickly rebounded. In fact, there are so many of the creatures running around that many residents in Florida have taken to calling them reptilian squirrels. 2. USA to zebra. Zebras and their iconic stripes are so closely identified with the plains of Africa that it's hard to imagine them living wild in any other part of the world. They're known to be stubborn critters and resistant to training. They were also among the animals that inhabited what was once the world's largest private zoo, and that was located at Hearst Castle near San Simeon, California. When newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst died in 1951, the majority of those exotic animals were divided among zoos, but some of the creatures, like the zebras, were let loose on the estate's grounds. They continued to breed, and today a herd of their descendants can still be seen roaming about the estate. 1. Pablo Escobar's hippos. We all know that hippos are those huge temperamental beasts that are native to Africa. So, how did a herd of hippos wind up in the jungles of South America? Well, it was actually thanks to the dealings of drug kingpin Pablo Escobar. In the late 1980s, he brought 4 of the animals to live at his estate called Hacienda Napoles, about 64 miles from Medellin. Now, after Escobar's death, the hippos were deemed too dangerous to move, so they were left on the deserted estate. By 2007, they numbered about 16 and could be seen roaming by a nearby river. And along the way, they gained a reputation for attacking humans and killing livestock. By 2014, about 40 individuals were documented, descended from those original 4. Now, experts say that unless the herd is managed, the population could double over the next decade. Did you know that Escobar's former estate now houses a type of theme park, which is said to include those feral hippos?